Welcome to our webinar today, When Games Go Small, Mobile Learning Game Design Do's and Don'ts. For those of you that don't know, we are with an organization called Bottom Line Performance, or BLP. We are focused on helping clients design and develop the right learning solution. Many times that right learning solution ends up being a mobile learning game of some type or just a plain old board game of some type. So we're going to share some of those experiences and some of the best practices and tips we've picked up along the way. My name is Stephen Bowler. I'm the Director of Marketing and Product Management at Bottom Line Performance. I will be your moderator today, so I'll be watching the chat. I'll be gathering questions that we can ask Sharon when she stops for questions, and I'll also be responding here and there, pushing out some links as we go through the webinar. And Sharon Bowler is the president of Bottom Line Performance. She is also the author, a co-author with Dr. Carl Kopp of Play to Learn, which is a book that's all about learning game design. And she's been the lead designer on numerous learning games, including the TE Town app, and as well as our Knowledge Guru platform. So Sharon, I'll let you take it from here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here with you and excited that you have decided that this is worthy of an hour of your time, and I hope to make it so for you. I always love to start any webinar I do by learning a little bit more about you. So if you wouldn't mind sharing via the chat, what is your role in the organization and what's your top reason for attending this afternoon or this morning or this evening, depending on your time zone? What are you kind of hoping to get from here in our time in the next hour? I guess you can do it either question or chat, whichever comes up for you. Gamification, change management to increase engagement. Okay. Yay to specific interest in mobile. Sharing innovations. Awesome. Make CBT more fun. Well, hopefully, awesome. These are great micro-learning, mobile learning, et cetera. We're going to kind of be talking about all of those. If you have questions as we go, please feel free to continue to share them in this question space. Steve's going to moderate it, and he will stop me at any time if I get rolling and fail to address something that's pertinent to you. I will also make sure that we stop early enough in this hour that you have ample time to do some Q&A at the end if you would like. So with that said, I feel like I have, there's a span of folks here this afternoon, some who are just trying to get a macro lay of the land, if you will, some who are very explicitly focused on mobile, which is good, and some of who are just trying to find more ways to make things engaging or mentally involving to the learner, and I'm guessing thinking, well, maybe games are one of those ways. So let's go ahead and get started. We've done introductions, and I want to talk first about why design matters so much, and that design is not really one thing, it's four things when we're talking about mobile game design and learning game design. I'll talk about best practices in each quadrant of the design arena, the importance of iterating as you go through design, and I am showing as much as I'm telling here. This whole presentation over the next hour is a lot of showing while I tell. And then we're specifically going to focus on a case study of TE Town, which Steve alluded to, which is a great case study on mobile learning game design and the success that TE Connectivity had with the implementation of that mobile game. And then we'll close and wrap with some final questions and answers if I have failed to address anything as we've gone along. So let's go ahead and get started by talking about the challenges and opportunities that are very unique and specific to the small screen. So when you think about what it's going to take to create a successful mobile learning game, we really have to think about 4 design quadrants. And that's what that handout that Steve encouraged you to download references, these quadrants, and it's a checklist of the things to think about within each quadrant. So first we have to think about user experience design. We then have to also think about the instructional design. Third, we have to think about game design. And finally, we have to think about user interface design. And those are all unique. And I know a lot of times people talk about UX and UI, user experience and user interface design, almost interchangeably. but they are not the same thing. So we're going to take a look at each one of those quadrants. And I think a great way to think about this is actually by starting out to think about vehicles. So if I asked you, and please feel free to use again the question thing to respond, how many people can you fit into a limousine? What would you tell me that the user experience is for a limousine? What is it for? What is its value? Why do people want a limo as opposed to another kind of car? Yeah, spacious comfort, specific for certain kinds of events, luxury experience, not driving themselves. Okay, awesome answers. So then what would be the subcompact car? So think about a Toyota Prius or Corolla or Honda Civic. Why that? Yep, efficiency, cost savings, gas mileage, zippy, I love it, practical, but it's economy, we think of that. Now, what about this? A unicycle, it's a vehicle too. What's novelty? Everybody's thinking there's no way I would want to be on a unicycle. Amusement, that's a great one. Yes, amusement, fun. If you want a limo and somebody said, here, I have a unicycle, it doesn't get you there, right? They each have their own different, unique user experience and value to the user. And that's the same thing is also true. So a game on a mobile device is not just a translation of a game on a bigger device. So the first quadrant that we have to think about is user experience design. And the definition of a good user experience design are three things. First of all, that user experience delivers value to that user, and it's solving some sort of a problem or need that they have. Second is it's easy to use and understand. And third, it's enjoyable and engaging to use. And I saw a lot of responses when I first asked why you were here on that desire to find and increase engagement. And that is all wrapped up in the user experience design. The second element or quadrant is user interface design. And I saw a question on, is there a hierarchy or an order? And I think you have to start with the user experience design and the instructional design. User interface design supports good user experience design. It does not equal it. So user interface design is that graphical look and feel in this instance of the game. And like I said, it supports the user experience, but it's not equal to the user experience. And too often it's interchangeable. When we think of something looks good graphically, then it's providing an optimal user experience, and that is not necessarily the case. Then we have instructional design, and instructional design is all about the design and structure of the experience so that it meets specific learning needs for the audience that you have in mind. And I say specific audience because it's kind of like the unicycle and the limo. Depending on who the user is, one is better than the other. And that is very true for a mobile learning game. And it's not going to be the optimal learning vehicle for everyone. There are specific instances where that's going to be a better solution for someone than others. And then the final component of this quadrant is the game design. And the game design is the design of the play experience itself. It includes things like core dynamic, the rules, the game elements that are all working together to enable the players to achieve a game goal. So in a learning game, we have an instructional goal and we have a game goal. They're not the same. They're two distinct goals that have to work in harmony together. So what I want to do is spend the rest of the time together talking about the criteria for each one of those. And Steve sent you the handout. There's also a blog post that we have out there that kind of summarizes the same criteria. It'll be a great follow-up piece for this for you. So if I asked you what user experience design was, can you guys think just in general of some principles that you think apply to user experience? I kind of want to see what your knowledge level is of this before I start sharing all of this. So when I say UX, what kinds of things do you think are part of UX on a mobile experience of any kind? I've cheated and given you the first one. It's that the first thing you need to know is that you have to design to the smallest screen that you're going to have. Yep, it's legible, it's easy to use, it's consistent, it's not too difficult. It goes to that ease of use and ability to understand. Responsiveness, absolutely. Navigation, yes. Compelling imagery. Now that is probably part of your UI, but for sure it leads to an enjoyable experience, so they go together. So when I talk about designing to the smallest screen and you guys talking about legible, this is an example of a supersized iPhone, the 7 SE. It's probably the biggest device right now, a kind of a phablety kind of device that you might design on. And if I'm going to design to the iPhone 5, which is a really small, compact phone, everything gets much, much smaller, and even my touch areas and my contact areas get much, much smaller. And this sounds obvious, but it can be easy to forget the variety of devices that people have, and you have to just assume what's your minimum, what's your smallest device going to be. The second thing is that on a small screen, you have to remember less is more, and you really should only focus on one key action or use per screen. And that becomes very, very hard to do. And I can't say that we're 100% successful at it, but thinking of a primary use for that screen and then ways to navigate to other ones is important. So on these screens here, and I'm going to see if I can do my little marker highlight tool for you guys, put my spotlight on it. So you see that the primary purpose here is an introduction screen for a game that they're about to play, the setup, etc., and then just a continue button. We're doing nothing else. And here there's an introduction, and you can swipe through it and you can dismiss, and that's about it. And then on the screen on the right, where we get into, this is actually a screen from TE Town. This screen is illustrating the player's map, town map. And there's one thing I can do on here, and that is tap to go into customer types. But I can also then navigate to other options. But my primary focus is being able to access my various regions of the map. So that's kind of trying to design to keep it simple. Cut the clutter. A lot of folks said you got to keep it simple, you got to make it less. So if you look at this screen on the left that I'm showing now, we tried at first, this was a very early iteration, and we're trying to figure out how do we help communicate how to play this game. And we started out with a bunch of text and then a play button. We tested it, and of course, as you guys can probably already anticipate, that wasn't well received. So we switched it to this. And so now you get to the main screen of this little mini game, and there's a how to play button. So if I really want to know how to play and I don't want to just explore, I can tap that, or I can just go to play. If I click the how to play button, then I get some directions that I can swipe through, so I'm managing this into little chunks at a time. Make your navigation intuitive. A couple of people referenced navigation. And again, this is harder than you think and requires that iterative testing, because what's intuitive to you may not be intuitive to someone else. So I explained that you have that main map on a game screen, and when you tap it, you open up a customer type, which was this screen. Well, how do you get back to the main map? You get back by tapping this arrow. That's how we designed it the first time. When we tested it, we found out no one could figure out how to get back to the main map. So we had to make it a little bit more intuitive and literally try to come up with a visual that looked like a map. We tried just the pinpoint, and people couldn't figure that out either. And we finally settled on this little map icon at the bottom and solved our problem. But what's intuitive to you as the designer may not be intuitive to the user. Somebody mentioned responsive design as a key element of UX. And if you are doing a web app, yes, you need a responsive design to that app. It has to look good across multiple screen types. So our Knowledge Guru platform is available as a desktop app or a mobile app. You can see here, this is a desktop of our Quest app. And you start this game and you have to select a character or an icon to represent you as you're going through this game. That's what it looks like on the big screen or a desktop screen or laptop screen. On the mobile device, we had to be able to scale that differently, and you can see that it still looks good. It's kind of a seamless experience, but yet we did definitely have to have a different layout for it to be a pleasant experience on the mobile device while also being a great experience on the desktop device. Here is another image of the actual game screen where you're starting to progress through levels. This is the desktop version over here, and you can see we have our world progress view on the left. We have our icons for accessing settings and player status over here in the top right with our score up here and our world progress down here. If I'm going to do that for the mobile version, you can see I had to streamline it a lot. So I don't have all 3 worlds visible anymore. Like I do over here, I just have a label for the world I'm in now. I still have all my navigation buttons down here, and my score is up here, and then I move my little progress bar right below my score. So it still looks seamless, but I've had to reorganize the layout of that screen to make it look good across all devices. Cater to contrast. If you're using your phone, if you're using your phone and you're thinking about it as you just glance down on it, what matters most is that it's really easy to see at a glance and when things are small by contrast. So these are all examples of a game called Drive, and you can see we used a lot of white with some darker contrast. And even here, we've got contrast going on this far right between some shades of green. I have no idea how this is showing up on your monitor, but these are kind of greeny blue with a lot of white, and then a shading here to make it very, very visually easy to see. And we did a lot of testing on this and iterating to make sure that we were maximizing the contrast for ease of viewing. Design for how people hold a phone. And this is trickier than you think because how you hold a larger device versus how you hold the iPhone 5 device that easily fits into one hand and you can navigate everything is a little harder. You also want to minimize the need for people to type anything because even with the nifty little pop-up keyboards, etc., typing is an imprecise thing on a phone. And you have to attend to those little small details that really make something pop and stand out. And I'll be able to show you that a little bit more when we go through the TE Town case study. But if you look over here, the play button and the continue button are all easily accessible with the thumb. So I've kept them low. The swiping is a very big swipe area. So I'm typing the keep here and then they can swipe to see different options across, but they can do it with their thumb across the bottom. Here we had to struggle a little bit because they're actually turning a gear up here, but we tested to make sure you still could reach it with a thumb down at the bottom. We tend to avoid putting anything touchable up in this top quadrant of the screen because it's not reachable with your thumb. Here are other examples. You can see that this whole touch area is very large. We have our little click area down there. I'm tapping, making it really easy to access and tap these images over here. Now let's think about user interface. And it's really tough because your user interface is about look and feel, but think beyond just really cool, compelling images. Think about consistency of your buttons, your text, your screen types so that people can intuitively start to recognize different screen types as they go through your app. Make sure you're designing it for your user and not for you. That can be really hard if you are really interested in a fantasy theme or you like a certain color scheme. You have to think about what's going to appeal to your user and the user experience you're wanting them to have, not what is personally preferential to you. Another thing is to not reinvent and try and get really cute or clever. Stick with common conventions and things that people are used to seeing online now. That's called heuristics. And it makes a lot of sense for people, for instance, to associate the 3 little lines at the top. They recognize that as a menu item. It's called a hamburger. And people recognize it. So don't come up with a different clever way to represent your menu. Your UI should enhance the focus of what you're doing. You don't want it to be the focus. You don't want people to think about the user interface or the amazing graphics, but not notice the rest of the user experience. You also want to assume mistakes. And a great example of that you've probably seen forever is that when you are entering in your username and password on a screen, there's usually a little forgot password there. And there may also be a prompt that tells you, oh, hey, you entered in this password and your passwords are not matching. Those are little user interface design things that help assume a mistake that the user is probably going to make or likely to make, and makes it easy for them to fix it. Provide clear feedback. That also goes with the assume mistakes. If someone is doing something and you need to direct them to do something else, make sure you're providing feedback. Or if you need to cue them to something they need to do next, provide feedback as they go. This is a neat little tool that you can use as part of your user interface design. It's called a mood board. And here we have two mood boards. So the mood board on the left is very colorful. It's very primary colors. You've got the white with the colored line outlines. You can see these fonts that we used over here. So we're kind of just giving you a mood. And if I were to ask you what mood or mood words come to mind when you look at this, what would you say? Energy, playful, yeah. What about the mood board on the right? We've got this blue, kind of an aqua, an orange. We've got lots of straight color. We've got rounded buttons here. Calmer, more serious, analytical, trendy, or corporate. That is so spot on. That is so spot on. This is exactly when we were doing this, we wanted to come up with a board that reflected a more sophisticated corporate. So we didn't want to be boring corporate, but sophisticated corporate. And on the other end, we wanted something that was more playful or fun looking without looking silly. And yes, we do develop those in-house. I see a question about the color schemes, etc. So our graphic designers kind of develop those. And it is a great way when you're developing for a customer to just give them a mood board and let them react to it. Or before you even create a mood board, to ask them to give you words that they want people to feel when they see your app or your game. So if the customer had said happy, playful, energetic, we probably would have shown them more of this. Corporate, sophisticated, clean, modern, might have given them this. It's a great tool to help shape your user interface design. Let's go to instructional design principles. I like to talk about the learning and remembering equation because it's the basis by which you should design your solutions. So the top part of the equation relates to how you learn something, and the bottom part of this equation relates to how you remember something. You need both of those in order to be able to retrieve it later. So the starting point for a mobile learning game is this instructional design quadrant in the user experience. What problem are we solving? And how do we ensure that they learn what we need them to learn? And how do we get them to remember it? So on the top, you have to create some form or tap into motivation. You need to make sure that it's a balanced presentation of your content so that you're not overloading them cognitively at any one point in time. If they're really going to learn something, there has to be relevant practice coupled with timely feedback on that practice so they know if they're doing it well and why. And if they're making mistakes, they need to understand those and why. Then if we want to enhance the memory of it, we want to tap into emotion. We want to make sure that we give them spaced retrieval practice so that they get multiple opportunities to practice this learning and to get hit with this content again. And optimally, we might package it all up into a story or a theme. Those all work together to help you remember it later. And you can kind of start to see that this instructional design quadrant looks kind of a lot different than your user interface design quadrant and your user experience design quadrant, but they all have to work together. And then finally, we have the game design principles. We have to provide some sort of intriguing goal or challenge, and that'll tickle that motivation of the learner. We have to design to the target. So I do not want to design a World of Warcraft battle type game for someone who is primarily interested in more casual games or construct build type games. You want to stick with one or two core dynamics, especially in a mobile experience. So I mentioned constructor build. That's a dynamic. That's something people like to do in a game. Collecting things is something that people like to do in a game. If you think about Trivial Pursuit or Monopoly, you're collecting monopolies, but you're also doing territory acquisition in Monopoly, where you're acquiring the most cash and kind of amassing the greatest fortune and bankrupting everybody else. So you have to think about how many of those you're going to incorporate into a mobile game, and you don't want to make it too complex. You have to use appropriate game elements. What things are going to enhance both the gameplay experience and the learning experience? So they have to work together. You can't just think about it as a commercial game. You have to think about it as a learning game. So you have to make sure that you're tying into your instructional design principles as well. You need to provide clear rules. And in a mobile learning game, obviously the rules aren't explicit. The system is kind of cueing the player to the rules as they go along and cueing them as to what they can and cannot do. There is no rule book typically for people to read. And then you need to balance out your game complexity. If you make it too hard, people will disengage because it's too hard. But if you make it too easy, they'll exit out pretty quickly because they won't find a challenge in it. So all of those things have to work together. And getting that all right requires an iteration process. So here I'm showing you, this is my artwork, and no judgment because I am not a great artist. This was a very early sketch of TE Town. So I sketched out the login screen, what they would see when they first entered into it, how they would select a guide, and we actually play test with this version first, where people are tapping on the screens that you see here, and then we're feeding them the next image. Then I have a map. You can see I really can't draw when you get to the map. And then I have them playing a game or picking a customer type to go into playing a game. And then next you see now we've got some actual functional screens that are working. But you can see early here, this ended up changing. These boxes ended up completely changing. This was not intuitive to users as to what was going on and what was tappable as you went into this. So as you go across these four screens, you can see changes that occurred slightly with each iteration. And I had somebody ask, how many iterations and tests do you do? For TE Town, we did 8 in sprints of 2 weeks, approximately 2 weeks, as we went, and we did testing of different features with each sprint. So we had a new minimum viable product each time we released a new version of this before it went out for its first version 1.0 release. But you can kind of see from here on the right compared to here over on the left, small but incremental changes occurred all along the way to get us to the version we felt was optimal for our players. And each one provided some enhancement that made it better as a user experience and as a gameplay experience. So let's talk more specifically about TE Town, and I'll kind of incorporate some of the instructional design elements and the user experience elements as I go into this. I want to talk about how going small can drive really big results for you as an organization. So we partnered with TE Connectivity about a year plus ago to create a mobile learning game. Specifically, we wanted to target distributors who are independent sales reps for TE. TE doesn't have its own sales force. They're relying on an independent distributor sales force, which means that that rep is also repping other products, not just a single manufacturer. So TE wanted to increase mind share. They wanted to make sure that distributors could recognize customer types and then associate product technologies with specific customer types so that they would position the right products with the right customers. So their general business goals was to help them understand. They knew that each any rep would be focused on about 3 to 5 primary customer types. TE has about 1 million product SKUs, so you're never going to get a distributor to know 1 million product SKUs, but you can get them to start thinking about their customers in terms of the types of products they sell and the product technologies that are embedded into that product. And that's what they wanted to do. The challenge we had was that those reps were largely mobile, going from customer to customer. The device that they're going to be on most of the time is a phone device, and the amount of time that they're going to have to engage in this is probably just going to be a few minutes at a time. So everything we designed into this game needed to be designed so that they could have a meaningful gameplay experience in 5 minutes. And keep coming back to it and playing over time. So those of you who play casual games now, like Candy Crush or Overcooked or anything like that, you know that you can go in there and you can play a level in just a few minutes. You can do it while you're standing in line at the grocery or at the drugstore. TE Town needed to be like that. It needed to be playable in very small chunks. The results they've gotten have been excellent. They've had outstanding changes to their sales from it, but what we can specifically tell you is that it's been used more than 2,300 times by over 355 plus distributors, and every single distributor user surveyed said they learned something meaningful about TE's products while playing the game. It's led to increased adoption of their overall sales enablement program. And remember, I told you that mind share and capturing that mind share of that independent distributor rep is hugely important. They can choose whether they participate in the training or not. This is not a requirement for them. It is definitely there as an enhancement. So it's pulling in distributors who weren't taking training at all before. And the anecdotal feedback that we've gotten, these are some of our verbatims. It was the best way to learn about our products by ourselves. I love it. And it's also garnered a lot of awards from our industry, as well as from the electronics industry here. So a couple of Brandon Hall Awards, a couple of Horizon Awards, plus an award from the ECIA, which is an electronics industry award. So here's how it starts. Learners are going to become mayor of TE Town, and after they do a real short tutorial, they can start constructing the town. So we borrowed from Sims, if any of you guys have played any Sim City ones. So they come in, they tap the map here that cues them, again, trying to make it very clear to them what they do, and then they pick their customer type, appliances, and then they're going to sell to that customer type. So the first mini game is introducing them to product applications that are going to be relevant to that customer type. So their goal in this mini game is just to identify all of those product applications that are relevant to appliances. And so that's what they do, and they shoot the relevant ones, ignore the rest, and that helps them populate their customer grid and also gain some town population. And town population is what maximizes their sales opportunities. So the customer type grid enables them to start selling, and it's also a very reinforcing experience because they're going to keep coming back to this grid over and over, building that knowledge of, okay, for appliance customer types, these are all relevant technologies to them. And they can go ahead and start going through the selling process. So the first thing they're going to do is meet their customer, and meeting the customer enables them to develop a deeper understanding of the application and the technologies embedded within it. So these are all technologies that might possibly be embedded into a garage door opener, and they play this game, and again, it's another game that they can play multiple times. This is going to take them through a sequence of 3 questions. They can come back and play if they make mistakes and grow their treasury, and then they'll come back and they'll do the product picker. So great, I've identified the appropriate technologies. Now my next step is to pick the right product families for that technology. So they can come in and play the product picker game. Correct answers will increase their treasury, incorrect answers cost them, and they get feedback on their choices. And then finally, they seal the deal with that particular customer. And that's all about being able to use relevant job resources that are available to them. So you can see this research button down here and asking the right questions. So tapping the resource to figure out what questions do I need to ask to get to the specific product recommendations I should make for this customer. So it's a really great reinforcing loop, game loop, that reinforces the behavior that they actually need to know and do on the job. They can then play another reinforcing game here that helps them remember the product technologies and applications associated with that particular customer type. And then finally, they can upgrade their town by using their treasury to make specific upgrades. And all the while they're doing that, they can track their progress and their performance, and they can see where they are in the game compared to all the other players in the game. So here you have a top 10 list, and here you have where you are in that list, and you also have a level. Okay, so now I've seen a lot of questions being asked as we've gone through, and I'm going to try and take those one at a time. And Steve, I know you've been tracking all the way through, so it's easy for me to see the most recent one. Do you have the mini games inside the game already developed? Okay, those are developed. This was 100% a custom game created for TE Connectivity. So we created all of those games specifically for them. And what did senior executives think of the gaming concept? They were supportive of it. And I think because it's been wildly successful and driven some really tangible business results for them, they're even more enthusiastic now than they might have been when we started. What else can I answer for you?
I think I saw a question early on. It was not so much how many times do we test, it was how many people test per iteration. And obviously that varies per project, but maybe you could at least share for TE.
Absolutely. We generally use the guidelines of typical UX, and we ask for 4 to 6 testers. What we've learned is that you will find 80% of the items in the first 4 to 6 people who test. So you don't really need to go deeper. Testing doesn't generally yield you a great return on investment. So with TE Town, we got a commitment from 4 testers who tested on each iteration. And then we had a couple of specific time points where we actually did some external usability testing early on that was independent of those testers. So the 4 testers that we used from TE were all representatives from our target audience, so they could speak to that from their point of view. Usabilitytesting.com is an entity that we will use just to do some straight up usability testing that is independent of the content. This is a native app. So somebody asked if it's a hosted game or it's a standalone game. So this could actually be done either way, but it is a native app available both on Google Play and the iOS App Store. And the tracking is set up as a backend database, and you design that tracking as you're doing the outset of the game. So you don't want to think about your tracking after the fact. You start out by deciding what things do we want to track as we create this game. What else can I answer for you? Steve, did you see anything else?
No, I think that covered the main questions.
Okay, I do see one about Knowledge Guru for desktop and mobile separately in 2 code bases, or is it work differently? It is not a responsive design Zolt. It is 2 code bases, but they're very similar, and it doesn't take much to tweak from one to the other. But what it is doing is when you log in as a user, it is recognizing the device that you are logging in at, and it's feeding you the appropriate version of the game. Okay, total design and development time toward delivery. For that first version 1.0 time, we started developing, or excuse me, we started the design process in October of, I want to say, 2015. Then we had the Christmas break where nothing was happening. And we started development in February of 2016, and the first version was rolled out in May of 2016. So that's the calendar time. Can we store participants' response as data for future analysis? I don't know. Okay, so Steve, you've already answered that one probably. Okay.
Yep. So the question was about storing data in a game like this for further analysis. So the answer is yes. You can always create a database on the back end of something like this and store whatever data you want. Sharon can speak to how much of a requirement that was for TE. I don't think they were wanting to track every single granular thing that people were doing. For Knowledge Guru, there is a back-end analytics tool that gathers a lot of different data as people play those apps.
Yeah, and I see somebody asked if TE Town was developed in Knowledge Guru. Those are no. So TE Town is a standalone game. Knowledge Guru is a platform that lets you create games, but those games are all gonna, the gameplay is going to be the same in every game you create within that platform. There are 3 different apps within Knowledge Guru, so you can create 3 different kinds of games, but it's a self-contained system. How many staff work on a project? That's a great question, Jeff. So the team for the TE Town included an instructional designer, 2 instructional designers actually, because I functioned as one of those, game designer, and 2 software developers. So I think we had a team of 5 working on it. And the software developers tend to take different roles. So there's one person working on back end, database, and then there's another person building out games. And because it was so modularized with the mini games, you could have 2 developers working on mini games simultaneously. And then there's also an artist in there. I think I neglected that. So there were 6. That was a team of 6. Any other questions? All right. Now I would also add, so Jeff asked a great question about the staff. So that's something to think about, because when you think about those 4 quadrants, those are obviously 4 different skill sets. And so if you are on a smaller team or have a smaller budget, you may not have separate people doing all of those, but you need to make sure that you have all 4 skill sets represented in some fashion. And that's where I think, as people are asking questions about game engines, that's a possibility for you, because the game engine tries to have some of that game creation done for you if that's a skill set that you don't have. If user interface design is not a skill set that you have, you can seek out templates that might help you, or resources that might help you, where you can download some things. And I saw Android and Apple coming from Milton, and I'm not sure what you're referencing there. TE Town was designed to support both. The Knowledge Guru platform, and we showed several games from that in this presentation, is also supported on both. All right. Any final questions before we wrap up? So if you do have other questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm available on Twitter. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can just shoot me an email, whatever works for you. And Steve, I'll let you kind of bring it to a close for us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us, and be on the lookout for future webinar invitations. We do these pretty regularly. We haven't picked our next topic or date yet, but when we do, you guys will be the first to know. So thanks a lot, and we'll leave the slide up for a few more minutes as people exit. Thanks for joining us.